This is The Fears of Eisenhower. Is the American military-industrial complex a threat to democracy? This is my presentation for Political Science 201.M01L, Introduction to American Government. Now, this all starts because of a warning given by President Eisenhower in his 1961 farewell address. Now, what's really interesting about this address is that it's commonly really misinterpreted in the context that it arose from. A lot of people assume, oh, he was warning of the big, bad military-industrial complex, that it's so corrupt and it's such a problem. Really, the way that Eisenhower viewed the military-industrial complex was like a very powerful, efficient tool that was very, very important. And really, his warning was more addressed towards that it shouldn't be used for transient purposes. Again, Dwight Eisenhower was a highly decorated general. He served during World War II. He led troops into combat. I mean, he saw war firsthand. He knew the true cost. He knew what it actually entailed. And so, from a place of experience is where he really formed his views on how this complex should be used. Even though he was a Republican, he was pretty moderate and actually got quite a bit of flack from both sides of the aisle for being kind of a staunch minimalist when it came to the military. He believed in having a strong industrial backing to a strong military because obviously it was very important. He knew that. But at the same time, he was very worried that it would be, America would develop a bad habit of using it way too frequently. And additionally, what is also really interesting is his 1961 farewell address that warned of this military-industrial complex, getting out of control and out of hand, was kind of directed in response to this huge hysteria that was going on. I think it started in 1957 because of the Sputnik launch, where there was this narrative getting out amongst politicians of both sides, but I believe it was primarily Democrats, trying to say, oh my gosh, there's a quote-unquote missile gap, where, oh my gosh, the Soviets are so ahead of us, and we're really not prepared. Well, the problem is this was hugely exaggerated to the point of being, like, borderline fallacious. And Eisenhower knew this and was very aware of an emerging trend of war being used for political gain or political purposes. And he was very, very scared of what successors of his might do with this kind of incredibly powerful tool of the military-industrial complex, and that was his warning. Now, there are a lot of positives for the military-industrial complex. This was a huge aspect of modernization early in our history because, again, it can mobilize resources so quickly and so efficiently. Again, any nation really does need to have a strong military base and a strong industrial backing, just for, cases of national security, whether that be domestic or international. Also, because of the way that people could enlist in the military and work their way up, it did provide some aspects of social mobility. On top of that, it provided, countless jobs, whether you're enlisting or whether you're going into labor, manufacturing parts or any kind of equipment. And on top of that, it pioneered a lot of world-changing technologies that ended up, completely changing the lives of everyday Americans as well as the rest of the world. Two of the technological advancements that came about because of the American military-industrial complex is the internet and GPS. And I'll tell you what, I don't know where I'd be without those two things today. Now, as you have arguments for the military-industrial complex, you also have cons. And the problem is, this is kind of manifested a lot more recently in American history, where the funding's getting really out of control because of the incentivization of profit, and also the government has become way too dependent on private contractors with very little oversight of what they're doing. So they're engaging in a lot of fraud. They're marking things up to get more money out of the government, and it's a whole mess. Additionally, there's also a well-known socio-political effect called the boomerang effect, where when you have a militant force, or a country's military essentially going out abroad and using repressive techniques on designated others, they are more likely to bring that kind of behavior home, back to the mainland, and that can be very problematic for American citizens. And also, there is increasing militarism in non-military institutions. Now, there's a lot of economic consequences. Again, this was one of the things, this was really the main thing that Eisenhower was very concerned about, was he knew what the true cost was. There are figures currently that it cost the American government $1 million per year per soldier to have them deployed to Afghanistan. That's ridiculous cost. And so he was worried that the American government would get into these perpetual wars and would actually bankrupt the country and then shortchange domestic interests. And, that kind of goes back to the logic of okay, yeah, you can defend the external country, but if there's no strong infrastructure in the internal, well, what's the point? You gotta have a balance. Now, another non-military, and this is I'm sure a lot of people have seen this in the news recently, for the past few years. One of the main government institutions that is getting progressively militarized are local police departments. And this has been problematic for a whole host of reasons, especially, and this has especially come to light in the recent Black Lives Matter protests, where they are using these militarized repressive techniques against protesters, many of which are peacefully assembling under their First Amendment rights. And so it becomes very problematic when they are, targeting them with pepper spray and flashbangs and, all kinds of things. They're essentially treating them like criminals for exercising their basic rights. And again, this is a huge example of boomerang effect as well, as we see here. Again, this is a natural tendency. You have this mindset abroad, it's very likely to come back into the country and then be perpetuated on U.S. citizens. And again, with pre-existing racial tensions and already having proclivities to this kind of problematic behavior in the police force, especially around racial tensions, it's kind of inevitable, unfortunately. Now, the conclusion of my presentation is that, yes, the military-industrial complex does pose multiple dangers to our democracy, because it does pose a huge threat and burden to our economy. It poses a huge threat to civil liberties and rights because of boomerang effect and militarizing police and such. And also, it does pose a threat to democracy in our political system because, again, there is this bad habit of politicizing war. And that is getting us, it's kind of becoming a vicious cycle. All right, well, thank you for your time, and have a good day.